welcome to the Level Up With Us podcast.
Hey Grant, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm pretty excited about our podcast, to be honest, Cici.
Are you?
I do some research. I try and find interesting people to target to get on the
I was going to
podcast.
ask you how you found me.
And I came across a bio from one of your speaker slots. Talks about kind of your career as human resources as an employment law attorney, then also pivoting. Then you've held a number of roles in HR leadership from Smith and Nephew, Express Scripts, and obviously Ducks Unlimited now. A member of the Society of Human Resources Executive Network, the Voice of Work panel, as well as an advisory board member for the Women in Leadership program. How do you get all the time for this? You've got 2 children, 2 dogs, a cat. It's
The
crazy.
cat is very important. The cat is the alpha in our household.
So I have this in my house. My cat comes in and the dogs move out the way.
Oh my God. Yes, yes. It is the most hilarious thing. So I have 2 humongous dogs. One of them is a 112-pound German Shepherd, and the other
Wow.
is a 90-pound Labrador. And the cat weighs all of 15 pounds. And whenever whenever the dogs come in the house, they take a wide berth as far away from her as possible. It's fascinating.
I suppose there's an analogy or a lesson we could learn from that in business, but maybe who knows. So look, I'm super excited as I've already mentioned, and I suppose it would be good to start with maybe just for our listeners, start with walk us through a bit about you for our listeners.
Sure. I'd be happy to. I actually stumbled into human resources by way of employment law. So I am a lawyer by training. I immigrated to the United States. Don't want to give away my age, a long time ago. Before that, I went to law school and practiced law for a few years in the Philippines, where I was born and raised. And then I decided to punish myself more and pursue a master's degree in business administration. And that's how I landed in HR. And I really did not want to take the bar exams again. And so I said, oh, what can I do that'll allow me to find a job and not waste all those years in law school? So it was human resources, and I loved it. It was accidental how I stumbled into it. But my last lawyer stint was as an employment law attorney, and that was when I began to dabble into the human resources side of employment law, and I liked it far better than litigation and employment law, and that's how I got into it. And all my work experience since then, since I graduated from my MBA program, has been in human resources, and it was progressive role since then until my current role, which is the head of HR at Ducks Unlimited. And I transitioned from profit, very large companies like Smith and Nephew and Express Scripts to a nonprofit or for impact organization called Ducks Unlimited. It's a conservation organization based in Memphis, Tennessee. But we do work all over North America for conservation. We're small in terms of manpower. If you compare us to large companies, we have about 700 employees, but we really are a volunteer-led organization. There are thousands of volunteers that feel very strongly about our mission. So I think our total volunteer stands at about 30,000. So the work that we do is undertaken both by employees and volunteers, and it's an amazing place to work.
It's just on your background, I'd love to hear a bit more about, you trained as an employment lawyer and then you went to a lawyer's to do HR. I mean, walk me through it. Give me a little bit of insight into how that was, because obviously you didn't go straight into HR in law firms.
No. So when you're in law school, you're kind of figuring out what kind of law you want to do. And I had no idea when I was in law school, but I landed in a telecommunications company in the law office, in the legal office of that telecommunications company. And this was a huge multi-thousand multinational telecommunications company based in Southeast Asia. And I luckily was assigned to employment law. So that was the core practice of that particular little branch of that legal office. And that's how I stumbled into it. And I began dealing with employment law issues within the organization from the employer standpoint, trying to understand how the law applies to some employer-employee situations that we found in that organization. So that's where it started, and I really loved getting into that. The legal training helped, but it really was about understanding behavior, which I found fascinating.
It's really interesting because in the last episode mentioned that, as a HR exec or a HR professional throughout your career, make friends with the employment lawyers.
Yeah, no, the employment lawyer is your friend, actually. Since I've been in HR, I have had to cultivate to your, that is very sound advice. I've tried to cultivate good relationships with our in-house counsel and our external counsel. And I'm always of the belief that you try to, bring them in from the very beginning so they know what you're doing and they're kind of guiding you about what to do, so they're not doing cleanup work when you mess up. And that's how human resources should operate also. Bring us in from the beginning and we'll help you, we'll guide you, so we're not doing a lot of cleanup work afterwards.
What motivated you to want to build a career in HR and talent? What was the what was the pivotal moment that made you kind of push from lawyer to HR and talent?
It was trying to understand why people do what they do. What motivates people is really fascinating to me. And in the world of work, that translates to how to motivate and engage people. And it really is knowing that one person's motivation is uniquely theirs. And if you understand that, then that's the key to great leadership, right? So that really was the pivotal moment for me, because when you're a lawyer and you're dealing with the black and white, and you're dealing with a set of facts, and this person did this and this person did that, but why? And then that's where it started, trying to understand behavior, trying to understand motivations. It led me to be a student, really, of understanding, trying to understand behavior and motivations, which I really believe to at this point in my career is the key to great leadership, is understanding what motivates people.
And I find that really interesting because I actually did an MBA and studied law as well and did the law modules, and they're forever telling you to ignore the emotive side and the behavioral side of things, right? And so,
It's the exact opposite, right? So if you're a lawyer, and you see this in all the legal shows, motive is not important. It's not important. All that you need to prove is that it happened, what happened, and if you can prove it. But really, especially in the United States, where there's a jury system, right? Where I grew up in the Philippines, it's one judge, no jury system. So you have to appeal. There is no escaping appealing to motive, because people want to understand why people do what they do.
you've obviously now done a few positions in different companies, and you've seen the transition of people, HR and talent, and the various guises of that over the last few years. What would you say? What strategies are emerging in the HR and talent space right now that maybe didn't exist 10 years ago?
So I think one of the things that comes to mind whenever I'm asked the question is that people right now, the employee right now, as a general rule, are more comfortable about being their true selves at work. When I was, starting in the workforce, I felt that there needed to be a separation between your work persona and your real life persona, and how you are at work is not who you are at home or on the outside. And no, you can't be friends with anyone at work, especially if you're a lawyer or an HR person. But that is not the case anymore. It's almost become a full circle, right? And I just find it fascinating, because now, especially, if you're talking about multi-generational leadership, what appeals to younger members of the workforce now are true, authentic leaders, people they can relate to, whereas probably in older generations and older workers, it was more of an aspirational, a leader is somebody you aspire to, and they don't have feet of clay, right? They're out there, they're on a pedestal, but that is not true anymore. That is, I just find it fascinating that people are much more comfortable right now bringing their whole selves into the workplace.
I was at the HRO Today conference last week in Dallas, and a lot of discussion about the fact that there are now six generations in the workforce, which is just it's just mind blowing to think
It's
about, really.
mind-boggling, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
and and how do you think that that's changed the approach for for kind of people, talent, HR leaders? What's changed for them specifically?
I think the fact that there are so many generations in the workforce now. So I have a 16-year-old, and in a couple of years she'll be joining the workforce. Hopefully, she'll be off my payroll, at least get a summer job or something. um, you as a leader, especially people of my generation or and older, right? You really, really have to be open to learning from everybody. You
Mhm.
cannot be, kind of the traditional leader where you're the ultimate authority figure. Everyone takes direction from you, but in today's work environment, it is a very, very much a mutual learning experience among all the generations in the workforce. I really and truly think that for there to be a dynamic, effective workforce, um, workers at all levels need to learn from each other.
Yeah, and I mean maybe this is kind of going down into a rabbit hole, but I remember having this discussion with a group of HR execs at a dinner a couple of years ago, and we talked about the principle. I used to get told by my parents and everyone that you go to work, you get paid, right? Like it's an exchange, right? You get paid,
Yep,
and
yep.
that power dynamic has somewhat shifted now because now it's like I come to work, I give you my skills, right? You got to pay me good for my skills, and it was a very
Yeah,
different dynamic.
it is, and that's one of the things that's really kind of the pendulum swinging almost completely the opposite way, right?
Mm,
And I have preached this early on in my career, starting from when a candidate comes and interviews with you. I
mm,
always tell the hiring manager that this is a two-way street. They are interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them, because
yeah.
whether or not they get the job, they will forever be talking about what their experience was with you. And this was even before, what the lessons that the pandemic taught us, and
Mm,
before social media, where, every single thing you do can be on YouTube, the next day.
mm.
And I truly believe that social media and the digital age is part of it, is a huge part of why the power dynamics have shifted a little bit, and that workers have so much more power than they ever have.
And that's a really great segue into the next question because um, it would be remiss of us not to talk about AI on a podcast and talking about the digital shifts and technology. I mean, as a HR talent leader, like what is your thoughts on AI right now?
I think it's a tool, right? The latest iteration of AI, so automation, some form or fashion, has been around for a long, long time. So as the workforce has progressed, we continuously come up with better tools to enable us to do the work. And I see AI a little bit scarier perhaps and a little bit more powerful, but it's a tool, right? I don't think people should be afraid of it, and I know some people are, because there's this specter of AI potentially taking away jobs. But it's a tool, and I don't think we're at the point yet where AI can replace human judgment and human discretion.
Yeah.
So I think that it's a tool that can automate some of the more administrative tasks that we do. So
Mm.
that will enable us to be more strategic and more purposeful as leaders and as workers. But it's a tool that we should use to its full advantage.
Yeah, and I really like the way, actually, I really like the way you've encapsulated that and summarized it as a tool because I think that probably reduces some of the fear
Yeah,
that we see because there is a lot of fear mongering
there's a lot of fear. Yeah,
and
that's
actually
exactly right.
if you're senior leadership in a people or talent function and you allow the fear to manifest, then you're creating more work for yourself, right?
And you're going to be
Fundamentally.
left behind, right? It's just I don't think I am not. My 12-year-old son likes to tell me that he's more tech savvy than that he's more tech savvy than I am, and he may be right, but I don't shy away from technology.
No.
I try to figure out, what people are talking about, and I think the same is true with AI. You shouldn't be afraid of it. You should try to figure out how to make it work for you, because I think it's a tool that we can use to its full potential.
Is there any key areas that you're starting to explore right now in terms of AI?
So the easiest thing would be, recruiting, right? The recruiting software that applicant tracking systems that people use have long had parameters in place where the software looks for matches and keywords in the job description and then what people's resumes are. So that's something that's been in place for a while, and that's something that we have used. And I suspect that many other companies utilize the same technology, and they wouldn't necessarily think of it as AI, but that's really what it is.
Yeah, and back to your earlier point, automation in technology has existed in some form. Machine
Some
learning
form of fashion. Yep.
has been around for a very long time, and I agree. I think we're seeing a lot of benefit on that recruiting side, on the ability to drill down to the right profiles much quicker and use AI to remember those things, the things that we're filtering out. They're
Right.
able to remember. Um,
Right.
and I think it's yeah. I think I agree with you. I think tool is a great way to describe it. I've not kind of encapsulated it that way before, but it's a tool to aid us, and we should grab it by the horns. Talking about linking the two. So we've got kind of new skills needed, people to need to adopt to work with AI. And earlier, as you mentioned, and we talked about this transition from I have the skills, I'm giving you something, what are you giving me back? That I think is something that has helped drive this move towards what we call a skills-based organization. There is this huge focus for definitely for large orgs. I'm seeing it in large orgs much more, but this whole aspiration to be a skills-based organization. Um, what are your thoughts on skills-based organization and the aspiration to take your business to a skills-based organization?
So I think the appeal of a skills-based model is the fact that, I think it was Deloitte probably that came up with the term skills-based organization. And it's the concept is that this model takes individuals holistically rather than try to peg them into jobs. And this is all in keeping with what we've talked about, Grant, that employees have so much more power now in a model like this that takes each individual holistically rather than try to peg them into a square job, right? That takes all of themselves into account. So I think that is the attraction of a skills-based organization. And some organizations might already be doing that without them realizing it. And all that it is the practice of knowing, your talent really and truly, no matter what jobs they currently do, be it assigning them to interim projects or, project teams, just to find out what else they can do outside of their normal day-to-day jobs.
Yeah, and it's funny because I remember about 14, 15 months ago, I worked with a small business. We were looking at, trying to change the way they attract talent, trying to remove them from being so focused in contract hires, temp hires, perm hires, SOW hires, and trying to get them to think about, skills. What do you need? What do you need to deliver your skills?
Yeah.
And we kind of went through, and they were looking at it, and they said, well, we have the champion program. I said, oh, well, what's the champion program? And they said, well, it's where we find people who know how to do the key strategy things, and we group them together. And I said, well, you're kind of already taking a step there then.
Exactly. Like, along the lines of what we're talking about, that most people already utilize these tools and they don't even know it. So it's just another way of trying to figure out how to make your employees feel valued for all that they bring. So a lot of organizations do these project teams, and like I had an organization where we had a champion network where we found truly influential employees, and we would put them in tables, town halls, where we would give them news of a coming change and see how it impacted them, and we ask for their advice on how to disseminate this information to the broader employee population. So really we were utilizing their skills outside of their normal day-to-day job.
So I like to put the tough questions on the table. So is this an aspiration that every business should go in on? Should businesses say, right, I need to be a skills-based org and this is where I should be heading? Is it for everyone?
I don't think organizations should say, that they're aiming to be a skills-based organization, because then you run the risk of trying to be pegged into that, where there are obviously parameters and guardrails into what is a true skills-based organization. I think what every organization should aspire to is to try to make every employee feel valued and engaged, whatever level they're at. And that involves some skills-based leaning. And, among other things, I think there'll always be room for traditional job-based structures. So jobs that require some sort of licensing, for instance, you cannot get away from that. But what rather than an organization trying to say, I'm going to be a skills-based organization, every organization should say, I will strive to make each employee at my organization feel valued, empowered for everything that they bring to the table.
Yeah, and that's such an important part. And I think you're flipping it then to the emotive side, right? The more kind of the connecting of employees and the employer. I think one of the things that I always try and stick to is every org should know their skills-based taxonomy. Every org should know what skills they need. Every org should know what skills their employees has. And I think if you don't have that as a baseline, you can't cultivate that culture. You don't have to aspire to be a skills-based organization. You just have to understand your working population, and you need to match your skills to where they need to be, right?
There's no substitute of knowing your employees. That's really, and part of it is knowing their motivations, knowing their skills. There's just no substitute for it.
Agreed. Okay, so we're gonna pivot slightly, and I know this one is probably a bit more kind of close to home, but HR and talent and people leadership roles. So it's not a new phenomenon to see chief talent officers as the head role, as a senior leadership role. Someone has a seat at the table. However, it's somewhat started to accelerate recently. We've seen actually a slight uptick in the number of businesses having both a chief people officer and a chief talent officer. Now, again, I know you've held this role, so it's really good to get your insights and feedback, because there's kind of camp A that say, you shouldn't have so many people, HR talent people at senior leadership. You should have one person and they should disseminate and they should manage and cultivate a collaborative environment. Now, there's others that say talent is our number one priority, right? Talent, getting the right people is the number one priority. And managing talent and acquiring talent are two different mindsets, total different mindsets, and they need different representation. So I'm interested, what's your thoughts on the sort of structure of chief talent, chief people, chief HR, etc.?
So that's a very interesting question, because my title is actually Chief Talent Officer, but I am the Chief of HR where I work. And very interesting how we came to that title for me is because our CEO, when this chief people officer title is fairly recent, right? Fairly new. Yeah. And he said, which I completely agree with him and kudos to him. He said, well, I'm the chief people officer. I should be. And I said, you are completely right. And you are. So he said, I think HR's role is really to take care of our talent, cultivate our talent, retain our talent, attract talent. Yeah. So I think that would be a more appropriate role for HR. So that's where I'm going with this. I don't think anyone will argue that there needs to be a chief finance officer and a chief accounting officer. So that's kind of the same thing, unless it's an accounting firm. I don't know. But I think the HR person should be responsible for all facets of human resources. Another example that I can give you is the chief diversity officer. Right? There's arguments that say that the diversity person should not report into HR because HR's got its own slate of things to take care of. But that's part and parcel of what the chief HR person should be doing, and that should be part of their remit. Is my belief.
It's weird because you would think someone in the recruitment, I spent 17 years in the staffing and recruitment industry, right? You think I would be pushing for chief talent officers. Yeah, give them a seat at the table, right? Get them in there and help me out. But
Well,
I don't know.
I know it's hard enough, right? So it's only in the recent past that HR people have had a seat at the table. It's been hard enough getting here. I don't know that you want to muddle that with so many voices all kind of advocating for the same thing, but through different strategies, perhaps. So I think it needs to be a unified voice. Speaking for your people's strategy, and the person on top managing all of the HR functions should manage all of those kind of like voices within their team.
Yeah, and funnily enough, one of the conversation topics at a recent conference was the rise of CHROs and whether in the different guises, chief talent, chief people, becoming CEO, and whether we'll see that trajectory move forward. And I think that's not for debate today, but like I think that is a really
Oh,
interesting.
I've seen it. One of my previous companies was an HR person, but he was in HR and then he went on to become a CEO.
Well, okay, let's dive into that a little bit then. I can see it because actually we're in a much more emotive society, much more awareness around how people feel and how people think and how people act. It's also a much more uncertain environment. Uncertainty is the norm now, right? Is kind of what
Yep.
being able to be comfortable with the unknown is a phrase
Yep.
that I kind of use quite a lot.
Yes.
So I can see it. I can actually see why that would be valuable. And instead of someone being behind the scenes managing the exec team, needing someone who's authentic, that authentic leadership coming from the top. I
From the top.
absolutely get it. I get it. But I'm interested in your thoughts. What do you think then? Is it something that we'll see more of?
I think so. Yeah, because I remember when this executive was named CEO, and everybody knew that his background was HR. This was I want to say 10 years ago. It was kind of shocking. But now I don't think that'll be all that shocking anymore. I think the pandemic and all the lessons that it wrought has certainly brought to the fore just how important people are. Every company says that people are their best assets, but I don't know that every company really takes that to heart.
Okay.
But I think that's becoming more and more so as of late. So yeah, I don't think that is hard to foresee that we'll see more and more of it.
Yeah, look, I'm for it. I'm not saying I'm against it. I think it's a great thing. I'm just interested because, for example, if you've got the succession part, right? Like if you know that the HR or people leader is kind of gunning for the CEO seat, they know all the big secrets of the org, right?
They can't get rid of them because they know where all the bodies are.
Exactly. So switching gears a little bit, and I'm really keen to dive into this a bit, but one of the things that we're seeing a lot of orgs that come to us to look for recruitment or talent solutions is this question around how do they build a sustainable talent model? This kind of hire and fire, the having to dive into and spend thousands of pounds in certain skills areas or thousands of dollars in skills areas. It's not working for businesses. They're really trying to get to a point where their talent models and their talent acquisition is sustainable. Now, I'm quite interested in understanding, what do you think works well in terms of focusing on a sustainable talent model, given, we've talked actually about the challenges of today's dynamic work environment, right?
So where I'm sitting now, we are seeing that our talent strategy needs to focus long term, right? Because in the organization that I sit in, we we count as our supporters generations of families. And we have seen that we need to cultivate that passion, that loyalty to conservation and for our cause at an early age. So for me, where I'm sitting now, it has become really, really important and critical for me to understand what the long-term strategy is in terms of a talent model, right? How do we make sure that that passion does not die as we go through generations of conservation supporters? How do we keep feeding that flame? Because people who work for a nonprofit organization, they rarely come because they're going to make big bucks. They come for something bigger than themselves. So that's really what's different for me sitting where I'm sitting now. That realization was not something that I typically thought of in my other roles,
Yep.
because it was more like so I've managed I've provided HR support for call centers, for instance, where you really don't think about a long-term strategy for hiring because you have hourly employees, and you think about where the needs are, where perhaps communication is a huge skill set in the population, but you don't necessarily think about generations of people, and making sure that their passion for the conservation cause is still strong.
Yeah, and funny enough, the call center one's a really interesting example because one of the conversations I've had before is sustainable doesn't always have to be about long term, right? I think the answer that you gave in terms of where you are right now and the passion
Mhm.
for
Yep.
conservation, that is a long term aspiration.
Yep.
But for example, a sustainable talent model in call center might be looking at all of your population being part time because it
Oh,
works around them.
yep.
So
Yep.
actually, it's because I remember a client I worked with. I would say their attrition rate was something like 65%. Like it was horrendous.
No,
Call
that's
centers.
terrible. Our attrition rate here at Ducks Limited is single digits.
Right. But that call center, 65%, they were always aspiring and they always wanted people who had the passion for being a communication specialist. And sometimes you just have to get real. There aren't a big population of people who aspire to be a communication
No,
specialist, right?
no, you have
Um,
to be practical. It really depends on what you do, what your organization does.
mm,
That is a great example because I have worked in a call center
mm,
environment. You really don't think about a long-term strategy. You think about an English-speaking population. You think about cities where there's probably college students, right? Because those are the folks that gravitate towards this line of work,
mm,
part-time, hourly paid.
mhm,
So that's where you kind of have to focus your talent sourcing.
mm.
But certainly that strategy would be way different for a nonprofit organization.
And, final question on this part, but what have you seen? What challenges do you face when you're kind of looking at talent acquisition in your current place versus where you were before? And if we can avoid comp, because I know that's the easy one to go to.
I would say, harkening back to what we talked about earlier,
Mm,
people are not shy about voicing what their needs are.
right.
That was not the case, when I started working, where, you tried your level best to not ask for time off because you don't want to be seen as the one who's always needing time off, right? That there's much less of a stigma now, and people go to job interviews and they're very upfront
Mm.
about saying that, I have childcare needs. I need my schedule to be this. So that's not such a stigma anymore. That's definitely something that I've been seeing,
Yeah.
more and more as of late.
What advice would you give to, I mean, many of our listeners are probably 2, 3, 4, 5 years into their HR career, or they're either in talent acquisition or they're a HR BP. What advice would you give to them as they're kind of looking to continue to grow their HR career?
So it'll be what you said earlier in this conversation. I wish somebody had told me, don't be afraid of managing in the gray,
Mm,
because that's really, being comfortable in discomfort, because that's how you learn. Being trained as a lawyer, and that being my first real job, but that was very, very uncomfortable to me because it was black and white, everything, right? But HR is not so. So somebody new in this profession, I would say you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable, managing in the gray, because not everything is is a formula.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I've, for the last sort of 17 years, every HR person that I've kind of worked with closely for some time, you know, that is a superpower. It is a superpower,
Mm-hmm.
being
It really is.
able to wear the pains and strains of people, but also not know what the answer is, that's a pretty superpower.
I mean, it's the traditional mindset is that you treat everybody the same,
Mm,
right? Because you don't want to be accused of being unfair or playing favorites. But really, that's not the case anymore, and that's part of the challenge for being uncomfortable.
mm.
The recognition that you're not going to have all the answers for everything, and it's not a one size fits all. So you've got to be comfortable with that, because that's the only way you can lead in this day and age.
And looking forward, how should talent and HR professionals start to prepare for the future of work?
Be open to learning always.
Mm.
You will never be the smartest person in the room. No one is. And the minute you stop learning, you die. The traditional authoritative leader is no longer a viable leadership model.
Mm.
So you need to be open to learning from everyone and learning from every situation. Because we talked about the multiple generations of workers in the workforce, and each situation being different. So you've got to be flexible, you got to be agile, and you got to be open to learning.
Yeah, great advice. I totally agree. So, final question from me. Level Up's mission is to develop solutions that elevate the world of work. Our whole purpose is to help to elevate the world of work. What does elevating the world of work mean to you?
So we spend so much time at work, right? Like most of our waking hours is spent at work. So my belief, elevating the world of work, is that it shouldn't be a pain to go to work. You should love coming to work. If not love coming to work, then at least, enjoy the people around you, enjoy something about working. Because if it's a pain to come to work, if you dread coming into that building every morning, then it's time for you to go somewhere else. And to me, all in keeping with bringing your whole self to work, it's so much a part of your life. It shouldn't be a pain.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And the whole kind of bringing your authentic self through, from leadership through to bringing your authentic self to work, should make it more enjoyable. And one of the other things to finish on that is, I think everyone takes that as it always has to be fun and light and ha ha ha. But actually, I find fun in challenge. Now that sounds weird,
Yeah,
but you can be challenged, you can be mentally challenged, and you can be enjoying yourself. People need to
absolutely.
learn that, and then they'll realize that
Yeah.
that actually you can elevate the world of work even in trying times, because you're fixing things, you're moving things forward. And I think people forget that
Even in
sometimes.
strife, doesn't always have to be fun and games. If you're all, working your butts off to meet deadlines, but you're all in it together,
Mm.
and you love working with the people that you work with, there's enjoyment in that. There's fun in that.
Well, talking about enjoyment, I have really enjoyed this conversation, Cici. I'm
Oh, thank
so
you. I have
grateful.
too.
And
Thank you.
we've really enjoyed having you as a guest, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for reaching out to me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. Stay connected by subscribing to the Level Up With Us podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or find us on our website, leveluphcs.com. Tune in for the next episode of Level Up With Us. Until next time.